The apparent failure of Project SETI has led several scientists to conclude that there are no advanced civilizations anywhere in the cosmos, a conclusion that some feel is a bit premature.
Many scientists look at the SETI program and they say, see, we've scanned the heavens and we see no evidence of any intelligent life in outer space. Well, I don't think so. I don't think that perhaps in the next century we'll find any usable signal from outer space. First of all, we've only scanned perhaps 100 light years from the planet Earth in some detail. Our galaxy is 100,000 light years across, and galaxies are tens of millions of light years distant. So we've only scanned a small neighborhood of our galaxy. Second of all, we've only looked at frequencies near the frequency of hydrogen. That's silly. This goes back to the person who lost his key. A person who drops his key will often look next to a lamppost. But if you say to the man, why are you looking next to a lamppost? You dropped your key over there. The person will say, well, that's where the light is. There's no light over there. Therefore, I will look over here. We look at hydrogen frequencies because they are convenient. However, scientists don't think that these aliens will communicate at hydrogen frequencies. Perhaps they use laser technology. We've only barely begun to scan other frequencies. Therefore, we have to look at the broadband. Also, when you communicate across vast distances, we sometimes take a signal and chop it up. And then we send each piece and it reforms at the other end. That's how the internet works. Email is chopped up, sent through various cities, and is reformed at the other end. But if you were to intercept one fragment of email, you'd get nonsense, gibberish until it's reformed. Therefore, in outer space, they probably send signals not on one frequency, but perhaps on the entire spectrum, so that a passing star will not interrupt the entire signal. Then at the other end, they reassemble the signal. If you were to listen in on their signal, you would hear gibberish, nonsense. In other words, we could be in the middle of an intergalactic conversation and we wouldn't even know. Our technology is so primitive, we look on simply one frequency. Any advanced civilization will send messages across all frequencies in order to compensate for passing stars, passing stellar explosion, and static and interference. That's real science. However, scientists sometimes judge alien technology on the basis of what we can do, not on the basis of what a Type 3 civilization, millions of years more advanced than ours, can do.
A lot of UFO followers find scientists' attitudes to be somewhat of a paradox. On one hand, efforts are being made to listen to space in the hopes of picking up an alien signal. And on the other hand, scientists do not seem to be particularly interested in the UFO phenomenon. From an objective point of view, we must admit that there has been no solid proof linking this phenomenon to visits by extraterrestrials. But the theory is still valid. Unfortunately, too many scientists continue to view this theory as nothing more than a popular fantasy. To defend their view, scientists cite the Fermi paradox. 50 years ago, Nobel Prize winner Enrico Fermi, an Italian physicist, a friend of Einstein, once said, if there are extraterrestrials, where are they? In asking this question, Fermi wanted to point out to his colleagues that if life was as widespread in the cosmos as they believed it was, then it was reasonable to think that civilizations far more evolved than us existed. According to Fermi, several of those civilizations should be technologically advanced enough to visit us. By Fermi's logic, given the fact that extraterrestrials have not yet landed on our planet, it must mean that they don't exist. This rather radical statement became known in scientific circles as Fermi's paradox. From there, it was only a quick leap to say that people who believed they had met extraterrestrials were delusional.
As for the credibility of a witness, or the assessment of a witness's credibility, Enrico Fermi's name was often mentioned, saying, listen, if extraterrestrial beings had visited us and were among us, we wouldn't be sitting here discussing it. It would be obvious. We need only look at the example of Europeans arriving in North America in the 15th and 16th centuries. It didn't take years for news to spread to the West Coast that ships had arrived in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. It would be the same thing in modern times. If extraterrestrial beings were visiting Earth, which is highly unlikely, then they would be on television. They're not that shy.
The problem with Fermi's paradox is that it considers alien visits in terms of our expectations and not reality. Extraterrestrials may already be among us, unbeknownst to us.
There is the famous Fermi paradox. That is, if there are extraterrestrial beings out there, then where are they? Well, take a look at this. Let's say we have an anthill in the middle of a forest. And right next to the anthill, they're building a 10-lane superhighway. And the question is, would the ants be able to communicate or understand what a 10-lane superhighway is? Would the ants be able to understand the technology, the intentions of beings building a 10-lane superhighway right next to the ants? Let's say, however, you go down to the ants and you say to the ants, I bring you trinkets, I bring you beads, I bring you knowledge, I bring you nuclear energy, I bring you DNA technology, I bring you utopia. Take me to your leader. Is that what you say when you bump into ants? No. Most people simply step on a few of them. Now, if we are really a type 0 civilization, and beings of a type 3 civilization can soar across hyperspace, they are perhaps millions of years more advanced than us. The distance between us and ants would be the same comparable distance between type 3 and a type 0 civilization. In other words, we are so arrogant, we're so conceited that we say they must visit us. We're so important that they're going to interrupt all their business just to come to us and give us a little bit of super technology. I don't think so. Again, ants looking at a 10-lane superhighway, they would first of all not even know what a highway is. They would not be able to detect the presence of the highway, understand their communications, and even if they did, would the ants say, why don't they visit us? Why don't they come and bring us this fantastic technology of ours? I don't think so.
Other than the question of perception, scientists point to physics-related problems to disprove the theory that we are being visited by extraterrestrials. Their main argument, of course, is the expansive distances that separate the stars, which seem at first glance uncrossable, even traveling close to the speed of light.
In physics, we have something called the giggle factor. That is, anyone talking about UFOs will find themselves drummed out of the scientific community. UFO research is the third rail of science. Any scientist who dares touch UFO research finds their scientific career electrocuted. However, I think we have to look at the long-term perspective. Many scientists say the stars are so far away, hundreds, thousands of light years away, that any intelligent being would take thousands of years to reach the Earth, making it impractical. I think that's a mistake, because we assume that these extraterrestrial beings are only 100, 200 years more advanced than us. Then that's a problem. Einstein said that the speed of light is the ultimate speed limit. You cannot go faster than the speed of light. That's Einstein's special theory of relativity. But you see, we have to go beyond Einstein. We have to go to the general theory of relativity, where it is possible, we think, that you might be able to go faster than the speed of light. And even beyond that, to the quantum theory, to the unified field theory, in which all bets are off. So I think that the fundamental mistake that many scientists make is that they assume that extraterrestrial beings are only 100, 200 years beyond our civilization, not thousands, millions of years beyond ours.
What if extraterrestrials do not come from another planet, but rather from another dimension that we are unaware of? A sort of parallel universe out of our grasp. 5 years ago, such a concept would have been considered ludicrous. However, with the discovery of quantum physics, our vision of the universe is changing.
When I was a child, I used to go to the Japanese tea garden in San Francisco, and I used to look at the fish, the carp, swimming in a shallow pond. I used to go down and look at the fish and wonder What would it be like to live in 2 dimensions? These fish could only move forward, backward, left, and right. And I imagine what a strange universe it must be. The concept of up into the 3rd dimension was alien to them. I could put my nose right next to the fish, and they would never know that there was something called hyperspace. Today, many physicists believe that we are the fish. We move forward, backward, left, right, up, down. And we say that's all there is. What you see is what there is. However, we now believe that there is a theory of everything that will allow us to, quote, read the mind of God, as Albert Einstein would fondly say. We think that there is a higher theory called M theory that exists in 11 dimensions where we have strings and membranes that pulsate. And we now believe that our universe is nothing but a tiny bubble, a bubble floating in a much larger hyperspace. In other words, cosmologists don't really believe in a universe anymore. We believe in a multiverse, a megaverse of bubbles that are constantly springing into existence, expanding like in a Big Bang. So in other words, our universe may coexist in an ocean of other universes. Now, 5, 10 years ago, this notion was considered bizarre, science fiction. Not anymore. In the last 5 years, the data is almost conclusive. We have something called inflation. The fact that the universe expanded in many stages, one an extremely rapid stage of expansion. The only way to explain this rapid expansion is to assume that our universe is a bubble, coexisting with other bubbles in a multiverse, in a megaverse of universes.
Just one universe among so many others. It sounds like science fiction. But over the past few years, new discoveries have greatly reduced the gap between science and science fiction. Scottish genetic engineers cloned Dolly the sheep. American, British, and Dutch researchers succeeded in teleporting a photon, which is a particle of light. Obviously, we are still a long ways away from the famous Star Trek line, "Beam me up, Scotty." But we're already taking steps towards the teleportation imagined by Gene Roddenberry. What does the future hold? What will science be like in the year 3000? What might be the science of a civilization 100,000 years more technologically advanced than we are?
On Star Trek and many science fiction movies, we see an emerging Type 2 civilization. The Federation of Planets is Type 2. They have colonized a small fraction of our galaxy. However, they live in fear of a Type 3 civilization on their program called the Borg. The Borg are a genuine Type 3 civilization. They are galactic. They go between star systems within the galaxy itself. We physicists have looked carefully for Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3 civilizations in outer space. For example, a Type 2 civilization may have what is called a Dyson sphere. A Dyson sphere encapsulates an entire star. They are able to use the entire energy output of a star, which in turn is about 10 billion times the energy that is contained within a planetary civilization, a Type 1 civilization. We've looked for them. Even if they try to cloak themselves and hide themselves, they must obey the second law of thermodynamics. They must emit waste heat. In the infrared, we've looked for them. We've looked for the infrared signature of Dyson spheres in outer space. Unfortunately, at the present time, we have found no evidence of Type 1, Type 2, or Type 3 civilizations. But we physicists, when we look in outer space, we don't look for little green men. We look for civilizations on the basis of energy. Energy hundreds, thousands, millions of years ahead of ours. A Type 1 civilization is about 100 to 200 years ahead of ours. You can already see the beginning of it. The internet is the birth of a Type 1 telephone system. The European Union is the birth of a Type 1 economy. English and a few European languages are the foundation of a Type 1 language. A Type 2 civilization is perhaps 5,000, 10,000 years more advanced than ours, because growing at a simple 3% rate of their gross domestic product, they would attain stellar energy on a scale of perhaps 10,000 years. A Type 3 civilization would be perhaps 100,000 to 1,000,000 years more advanced than ours. My point is very simple. When we look at outer space, you cannot judge aliens by Type 0 technology. We assume that aliens are nothing but an advanced Type 0 civilization. However, once you attain Type 3 status, you have access to what is called the Planck energy. The Planck energy is 10 to the 19 billion electron volts. That's 1 with 19 zeros after it. That's a quadrillion times more powerful than our most advanced atom smasher. At the Planck energy, it may be possible to bend time into a pretzel, punch a hole in space, and leap into the 11th dimension.
Recently, a few astrophysicists proposed the idea of wormholes to explain the problem of crossing huge interstellar distances. In theory, these wormholes are like tunnels that allow passage from point A in the universe to point B using a shortcut. They are a pathway for interstellar travelers.
In Einstein's general theory of relativity, space-time is like a fabric, like a sheet of paper. And Einstein himself realized that perhaps the sheet of paper can fold on itself and give us a shortcut through space and time. In other words, take a sheet of paper. We all know that if I take 2 points, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. However, we now know that's not true. The shortest distance between 2 points is a wormhole. That is, if you can rip the fabric of space and time, you could take a shortcut, like a subway ride through space and time. Now, Einstein realized this. We call them Einstein-Rosen bridges, bridges between 2 points in space and time. Most people know this as Alice's looking glass. Through the looking glass, Alice was faced with a mirror. She put her hand through the mirror, and her hand went to the other side of Wonderland. In Einstein's equations, we have many solutions, in fact, hundreds of solutions, in which we have Einstein-Rosen bridges. For example, take a look at a black hole. If I have a spinning black hole, the black hole does not collapse to a dot. It collapses to a ring of neutrons. This ring of neutrons forms the frame of Alice's looking glass. If you fall in between the ring, through the ring, then your hand may in fact go to the other side of the universe. Now, there are problems involved with wormholes. The main problem is stability. We're not sure if they're stable. We have to go to a quantum theory to calculate whether or not you could really make a journey through the black hole itself. However, I should point out that astrophysicists have now discovered about 30 black holes in outer space. All of them are spinning very rapidly, about 1,000,000 miles an hour. And we do think that perhaps at the very center, there is a ring of neutrons, such that perhaps at the very center, if you go through the bullseye, you may go to perhaps another universe.
Are we being visited by aliens? According to the most recent statistics, close to 1 out of 2 Americans think so. If UFOs are linked to these visits from outer space, we can only marvel at their incredible discretion. History has shown that when 2 societies meet that are too far apart on the technological scale, chaos ensues to the detriment of the more primitive society.
Arthur C. Clarke once said, whether intelligent life exists in outer space or whether it doesn't exist in outer space, either thought is frightening. If we are the only ones in the universe with intelligence, it's frightening because we're alone. However, if we're not the only intelligent species on Earth, then we are also frightened because we wonder about their intentions. Think about what happened when Cortez met Montezuma in Mexico City. The Aztecs were perhaps 500, perhaps 1,000 years behind the technology of the West. Cortez had gunpowder, borrowed from the Chinese. He had horses. He had a technology centuries, perhaps 1,000 years more advanced than the Aztecs. The Aztec civilization, which lasted perhaps 10,000 years since the last ice age, collapsed in just a few months. That's what happens when 2 civilizations encounter each other, when one civilization is more advanced by perhaps a few centuries, but has malevolent designs. I think that if a civilization that advanced, millions of years advanced, more advanced than ours, were to meet ours, perhaps we would be ants to them. If a 10-lane superhighway were being built next door and there was an anthill next to it, what would the construction crew do? They wouldn't even give it a thought. They would simply pave the anthill away. My personal point of view is they're out there. In fact, many of my friends also believe they're out there. What divides us is the question of whether or not they can reach us, whether or not they can sail across millions of light years between different galaxies and star systems. However, most physicists believe in their heart of hearts, yes, they're probably out there. And when they do encounter us, I hope that when the encounter is made, an encounter of the third kind, that they are benevolent, that they are type 3, they are beyond planetary. At the present time, we are type 0. We have all the sectarian, fundamentalist, racial hatreds coming from the swamp. We are just barely out of the swamp with all the savagery of the swamp. By the time we're type 1, we will become interesting, civilized, a planetary civilization, capable of working out their differences, capable of being able to work out sectarian, nationalistic, regional differences. By the time they are type 3, they will have had perhaps 1,000,000 years in which to sort out all their aggressive tendencies. So I think that if we do encounter a type 3 civilization in outer space, it won't be like the encounter between Cortez and Montezuma. Perhaps they will be benevolent. Perhaps they will see intelligent life forms as precious. The most precious commodity in the universe is consciousness and intelligence.
If extraterrestrial beings are visiting us, what do they want? What interest could they possibly have in a civilization as primitive as ours? Nowadays, quantum physics is showing us a universe that is much more complex and dynamic than we thought. We no longer speak of a single universe, but rather multiple universes. The speed of light is no longer an absolute value. It is a simple variable in an equation that is constantly changing. Scientists who have been discrediting UFO reports under the pretext that alien visits are nothing more than a dream must now re-examine their arguments. While the data gathered to date on UFOs does not conclusively support the theory of extraterrestrial visits more than any other theory, science has not managed to exclude this possibility either.
We're aware that interstellar visits would require tools and means far beyond any technology that we have here on Earth. We would have to examine quantum physics, reformulate the theory of general relativity, and consider the possibility of traveling faster than the speed of light. All of that is reasonable. I'm certainly not going to sit here and tell you that science has gone as far as it can go, that in 100 years or 1,000 years we won't know much more than we do now. So it's just a question of means. I think that if a civilization continues to survive and to develop over a long period of time, it will eventually discover the means of interstellar travel. The question is, do many civilizations exist? And do they have enough wisdom to continue to survive long enough to reach this point? Earth has already launched 2 Voyager probes, which are now outside of our solar system. And over the next tens of thousands of years, they'll be reaching stars other than our sun. We're capable of sending out a small plaque with a drawing of a man and woman on it saying, "Hi, we're here." Will it end up in the right place? It's doubtful. There's a very small probability of it happening. We're still not ready to build crafts capable of carrying an entire ecosystem on board for interstellar travel. Trips such as those would require extreme speeds, which we're thousands of years away from achieving. The ship would need to have an entire ecosystem, including agriculture. It would be a bit like putting Montreal Island into orbit, with its entire population, which would continue to reproduce. We're not there yet, but we might be someday. If we're still a viable civilization in 10,000 years, in human and technological terms, then why not?
It up. And then we send each piece, and it reforms at the other end. That's how the internet works. Email is chopped up, sent through various cities, and is reformed at the other end. But if you were to intercept one fragment of email, you'd get nonsense, gibberish until it's reformed. Therefore, in outer space, they probably send signals not on one frequency, but perhaps on the entire spectrum, so that a passing star will not interrupt the entire signal. Then at the other end, they reassemble the signal. If you were to listen in light years from the planet Earth in some detail, our galaxy is 100,000 light years across, and galaxies are tens of millions of light years distant. So we've only scanned a small neighborhood of our galaxy. Second of all, we've only looked at frequencies near the frequency of hydrogen. That's silly. This goes back to the person who lost his key. A person who drops his key will often look next to a lamppost. But if you say to the man, "Why are you looking?"
The apparent failure of Project SETI has led several scientists to conclude that there are no advanced civilizations anywhere in the cosmos, a conclusion that some feel is a bit premature.
Many scientists look at the SETI program and they say, "See, we've scanned the heavens and we see no evidence of any intelligent life in outer space." Well, I don't think so. I don't think that perhaps in the next century we'll find any usable signal from outer space. First of all, we've only scanned perhaps 100 on their signal. You would hear gibberish, nonsense. In other words, we could be in the middle of an intergalactic conversation and we wouldn't even know. Our technology is so primitive, we look on simply one frequency. Any advanced civilization will send messages across all frequencies in order to compensate for passing stars, passing stellar explosion, and static and interference. That's real science. However, next to a lamppost, you dropped your key over there. The person will say, "Well, that's where the light is. There's no light over there. Therefore, I will look over here." We look at hydrogen frequencies because they are convenient. However, scientists don't think that these aliens will communicate at hydrogen frequencies. Perhaps they use laser technology. We've only barely begun to scan other frequencies. Therefore, we have to look at the broadband. Also, when you communicate across vast distances, we sometimes take a signal and chop